Well, good afternoon. This is my wife, Helen. My name is T, and this is our straight arrow Chuck Wagon. We got started in this several years ago. Helen and I both enjoyed riding horses and hanging around with horse people, but as we got more busted up over the years, we found that riding wasn't quite as much fun. So we started changing around, and we were looking for something else that we could do where we could enjoy the experience of being with the equine industry and yet at the same time contribute something along the way. So we came up with the idea of the Chuck Wagon, and a buddy of mine, Gary Graham, found us the running gear, all the red stuff on this, and it turns out that this was made in the 1880s right in Michigan at Grand Rapids. And we went out, found the wood, found some people that were very generous to help us along the way, and we put together everything you see here. The wood is off a reclaimed barn that's well over 100 years old. The blacksmithing stuff was done by myself or some other guys who really do know how to blacksmith, and we made up the stuff to outfit the Chuck Wagon with. A buddy of mine helped me make the Chuck box, Bob Mitchell, and then along the way we've had a number of people. Tom's Western Store and the Tyler family have been big supporters of the Chuck Wagon. They've introduced us and given us the opportunity to work with young kids and other organizations, nonprofits that we really enjoy working with, and having the opportunity to demonstrate and give them a little bit of the Western experience. Along the way, we did actually learn how to cook a little bit too, so we do a pretty much basic cattle drive Western fare. We do the biscuits. We do our version of the cowboy beans, which might be a little bit more meat and stuff in them than the cattle drive guys got, but they seem to go over pretty good. And of course, the staple of any Chuck Wagon is the Cowboy Coffee. We normally do anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 gallons at these get-togethers that we make up, and we just grind it on the side of the Chuck box, and works out pretty good. If you look at the inside of the Chuck box, you'll see pretty much the staples. We didn't do anything fancy here. Arbuckle's coffee was the actual coffee that they used on the cattle drives, because Arbuckle's came up with the manner in which to protect the bean by using a egg and sugar coating. This clock here, a buddy of ours, Byron Russell, found for us and gave to us. It keeps good time for us and works good. Every Chuck box would have needed one of those. Inside, you'd have had all your different coffees. You would have had your flours, sugar, spices. They did have some canned goods that they were able to take up the trail with them, so they had those. A lot of people don't recognize the cook, but with the Chuck Wagon cook, he was the number 2 man on the cattle drive. The only one that outranked him was the trail boss, and probably, to be honest, the trail boss probably didn't argue too much with the cook. But he was also the person that if you got busted up, would fix you up. If there was a dispute in camp, he took care of it, and what he said went. He moved this wagon every day up the trail, set up, got the fire going, prepared the food, and presented a reasonable meal of protein and carbs to the guys 3 times a day. Probably the most interesting fact that comes out of this is that on one cattle drive, they started out with 400 pounds of beans in the Chuck Wagon because they recognized how important the beans were for coffee for the cowboys. The other part of it, to a little bit of history, the basics of the cattle drive were simple. After the Civil War, the majority of the population was to the north and to the east, and yet you had all these longhorn steer running wild in the Texas area. And Charles Goodnight, in about 1866, came up with the idea of outfitting a Army surplus wagon with some changes that turned it now into what we recognize as the Chuck Wagon. He added the bows for the canvas. He ordered the Chuck box off the back, which was your cooking platform. He put a water barrel on the side. This boot on the bottom would be to carry your Dutch ovens and stuff. And along the way, people just improvised and made it work for them. So there is no such thing probably as a manufactured Chuck Wagon. It's just a wagon that they modified to make it work so they could go up the trail and feed the cowboys. 14 to 16 cowboys, 3 times a day for about 3 months. And those cowboys made, I think, about $1 a day. The cook was probably the second highest paid guy, and he maybe made $2 to $3. But it was a rough job. Those men worked awful hard. They were young, but they got the cattle to where they needed to be. And then as soon as the railroad started heading down to the north and to the west more, that kind of ended the need for the cattle drive. So about 1890s area, that was probably pretty much the end of the cattle drive as we knew it. But the chuck wagon is still a major identifying factor when you think about the Old West and the cowboy way of life. And for us, it's given us a great opportunity to stay hooked up with people we enjoy being around and doing things that we enjoy doing. So we hope you enjoy it. We give a full 100% money back guarantee on the food if you don't like it. We fully refund your money. And it hasn't cost us much because we've never charged for our meals, so it works real well for us. And it's awful hard for a man to complain about getting a free meal. So thanks a lot for coming out. We appreciate what people in the state of Michigan and Michigan Magazine and RFD TV do to support the equine industry and all of us that enjoy horses and being around horse people. Thank you.